What books do you read? I read fiction books. I read non-fiction books. I read mystery books. I read romance books. I read science fiction books. I read self-help books. I read biographies. I read history books. I read fantasy books. I read educational books. I read poetry books. I read motivational books. I read classic literature. I read contemporary fiction. I read graphic novels. I read self-improvement books. I read business books. I read travel books. I read science books. I read psychology books. I read philosophy books. I read art books. I read cooking books. I read health and wellness books. I read nature books. I read technology books. I read thriller books. I read children's books. Please subscribe to my channel.